The tropical disturbance that was looking more likely to become our next tropical storm or hurricane on approach to the Caribbean next week has crashed. It's looking way weaker and development chances have gone down. What happened? In this video, I'm going to show you the latest update on what's going on with the tropics. But first, if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button for more tropical weather updates. Here's a look at the NHC tropical weather outlook. We have Invest 91. Shower and thunderstorm activity is currently limited and disorganized in association with a tropical wave over the central tropical Atlantic. Upper level winds are favorable for development, but dry air is likely to limit development over the next couple days. However, the NHC is still thinking that a tropical depression could form early next week as the system moves westward at around 10 miles per hour across the central tropical Atlantic, and it is likely to be near the Lesser Antilles by the middle to later part of next week, and interests there should be monitoring its progress. Formation chance through 48 hours has gone down from yesterday's 60% down to 40%. We'll have to see what happens in the next outlook if it goes down even further or stays the same. Formation chance through 7 days is high at 70%, but it's down from 90%. So we're looking at a 90% chance of tropical cyclone formation, but then now it's downtrended pretty quickly all the way down to 70%, which is still high. It's a lot less, but it still is approaching the Caribbean, so it's going to be something to watch, but it has downtrended a lot and it looks a lot weaker than previously forecasted. Here's the current satellite imagery for Invest 91L. Here's where the Invest is located. A few hours ago, there was really not much shower and thunderstorm activity at all with it. Now the convection is starting to come back a little bit, as you can see in some of the more recent frames on the satellite, but there's a lot of dry air out in front of it at all levels of the atmosphere. That's going to be pretty unfavorable for development, even though there is pretty light wind shear, but the dry air is going to be a big problem. Behind Invest 91, we do have a lot more moisture that looks way more impressive behind Invest 91. The forecast models are showing a potential development after Invest 91. We'll have to keep an eye on that and see what happens, but the track guidance for Invest 91 does take it into the Caribbean, so it's still likely to move into the eastern and northeastern Caribbean, but the intensity and development potential is what has gone down. The track is still pretty much the same as it was yesterday. Now, the intensity guidance is still thinking it could become a tropical storm in around 48 to 72 hours or so, as of the guidance from several hours ago. It probably is going to have a harder time intensifying than this, but, we'll see. And they're even showing still potentially a hurricane in like 5 to 7 days, but those are only a couple models. Most of them bring it up to tropical storm intensity in the next several days, but even that might be a little bit on the higher side of things. It might not even turn into much of anything, because here's a look at the Euro model, for example, which yesterday was showing it staying pretty weak, and it looks like that might be a more realistic scenario at this point. As you can see this weekend, not really a whole lot of anything with it, and it actually just gets absorbed into all this dry air, and you have just pretty much disorganized moisture. And then it might try to do something around September 12th, kind of next weekend, September 12th to September 14th or so, before it turns into more of a non-tropical system, probably. But then, yeah, it's just a weak area of low pressure, and the Euro model is not showing any other tropical cyclone development all the way into September 20th. So that's pretty interesting. So the tropics might be pretty quiet for a while, according to the Euro. Now, the GFS is also showing our tropical system staying pretty weak, maybe tries to become a weak tropical depression or tropical storm on approach to the Caribbean, but then it moves into the northeastern Caribbean, and then it pretty much disappears. Even though it goes into more moisture, you see there's a lot of moisture there, but really doesn't do much, and you see this massive frontal system that moves off the east coast of the U.S., brings a cold front extending all the way across the western part of the Atlantic, the southwestern Atlantic, all the way to the Gulf Coast. But then you see it on the tail end of that, potentially a storm system in the Gulf around September 15th. That might try to do something, and we'll have to watch if there is a big frontal boundary going across the western Atlantic. There will be a couple of areas to see if, as that main low pressure area pulls away, if we're able to see some areas of low pressure that separate from that frontal boundary and are able to turn into some sort of subtropical or even a tropical system. The GFS model showing this happening around September 19th. So we'll have to see what happens with that. So there are several areas of low pressure happening out there, but other than that, the main development region where we'd be expecting most of the tropical activity looks completely quiet all the way through the entire model run of the GFS model, all the way out till September 20th, September 21st. That's actually weird to not have any tropical activity happening, any named storms, hurricanes happening during what should be the peak of hurricane season. That's something pretty weird. And if that continues, we could be looking at a season potentially as inactive as 2013, depending on what happens, unless things heat up rapidly in October. Here's a look at the GFS model showing the wind shear. The wind shear is actually not going to be a problem for Invest 91 over the next couple days. As the NHC was saying, the upper level winds are favorable for development. Look, wind shear of 6 knots is pretty favorable, but the relative humidity is 68%, which isn't terrible, but it's still not really favorable. And then as this continues westward, it tries to develop, but then notice there's this upper level low pressure system, which if it stays far enough to the north, it's not really going to be a huge problem, but it looks like it's pushing more westerly winds towards this storm system as the storm is going to the west, so it's running into all those winds as it goes into the Caribbean, and then we see more wind shear over the Caribbean as well, not just over to the north of this system, over the tropical Atlantic. You see wind shear increases to 21 knots, even though it's going to some more moisture of 71% relative humidity. The wind shear is 21 knots, which is not favorable. And then notice the wind shear increases to over 30 knots, which would completely destroy this tropical system, and that's why it's not expected to do much of anything at all. And then we do see a lot of lighter wind shear across the main development region, but for some reason, not a whole lot of strong tropical waves or anything impressive happening out there, even going past mid-September. And then we'll have to watch potentially the Gulf, this area around Florida and the southwestern Atlantic for potential development. The GFS model is showing it, and also the Climate Prediction Center in their Global Tropics Hazards Outlook was showing some activity as well. We'll look at that in a little bit, but we also have the HAFS-A model not showing a whole lot of development. Even yesterday, they were keeping it weak as a weak tropical storm moving towards the northeastern Caribbean, but now they're showing it even weaker as barely a tropical storm, maybe just a tropical depression moving into the northeastern Caribbean. But again, it is likely to hit the Caribbean. The intensity part is what has trended down, and the ability of this to strengthen into a significant storm system is what's been really brought into question. Here's a look at the Euro ensembles showing over the next 5 days or so, going into Wednesday. We're looking at a tropical storm system potentially, or a weak area of low pressure that the Euro model is showing moving towards the northeast Caribbean. And then notice some of the models are showing a slightly stronger system, but turning it out into the Atlantic. But a lot of the models are really showing something pretty weak, if there's even any development at all with it. And it looks like the models that show something later, which I think is probably the activity that they're picking up on the moisture that's behind Invest 91, that might have some potential to do something out, past around the September 15th timeframe, so the week after next week. The GEFS ensembles also keeping it very weak, even showing even weaker actually, but still heading towards the Caribbean. So the Euro model scenario of keeping it weak and bringing it into the Caribbean seems to be what is looking more and more likely, and both of the models are coming into more agreement with that scenario. And some of the GFS ensembles are taking it even further west in the Caribbean as a very weak tropical storm. A lot of the ensembles don't really show much development at all with this, keeping it at potentially a tropical depression, a weak tropical storm, if that at all. It might not even develop because of the dry air. Could, if that just wipes it out, which it looks like some of that convection is coming back. So we'll have to see, over the weekend what happens and what happens with the structure of this storm and kind of how much that dry air is affecting Invest 91. So we'll have a better idea of what might end up happening with it. But it's looking less likely to turn into something very significant at this point. Now, it is still going to be going over some very warm sea surface temperatures that are actually getting warmer and warmer. The further west it goes, we're seeing sea surface temperatures around 28 degrees Celsius. Then we start seeing 29, 30 degrees Celsius, which is like 84 to 86 degrees as this goes towards the Caribbean. So that's going to be something to watch if this is able to start to organize. Like, the sea surface temperatures are favorable for that. The wind shear is right now, it's pretty light, but then it's going to start increasing potentially according to some of the models. And then we also have a lot of that dry air right now that's going to be causing a big problem. And then we also have the MJO. It's not really favorable right now over the Atlantic. It's slightly unfavorable over the next few days. By September 10th, we're looking at very unfavorable over the tropical Atlantic. And then it looks like it starts getting a little more favorable over the Eastern Pacific and the Western Atlantic starting in mid-September, going all the way into the end of September, even potentially October. But over Africa is not looking so favorable. So we might not be seeing as much tropical wave activity as we might be expecting. Now, September 20th to September 25th, it looks like there's slightly more favorable conditions over Africa, but we'll have to see what happens with that, and especially if it's more favorable over the Eastern Pacific and the Western Atlantic in this time frame, we'll have to see what happens with the Central American gyre. That's going to be another thing to watch. But we also have activity going on in the Eastern Pacific. Yesterday we had Tropical Storm Lorena. That's no longer a tropical cyclone, so the NHC has removed that from their tropical weather outlook. But some of the moisture is still expected to be moving through the northwestern Mexico and the southwestern U.S. Then we have Hurricane Kiko with maximum sustained winds at 130 miles an hour. So it's a Category 4 hurricane. Minimum central pressure is 951 millibars, moving west-northwest at 10 miles an hour. Then we have another disturbance with a 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days, potentially going to be our next storm in the Eastern Pacific. So interestingly enough, the Eastern Pacific is producing a lot of activity, while the Atlantic is completely quiet, which is kind of a little bit different than what we were expecting for this hurricane season. So that's interesting, especially with an Enzo neutral going towards a weak La Nina. And here's a look at the satellite imagery for Hurricane Kiko. It's a super powerful, like compact, organized Category 4 hurricane. It's more of an annular type hurricane, which sometimes happens in the Eastern Pacific, and those hurricanes can stay pretty powerful for quite a while. The key messages for Hurricane Kiko: it is forecasted to approach the Hawaiian Islands during the early to middle portion of next week. There is the potential for impacts, but it's too soon to say what's exactly going to happen. So if you're in Hawaii, just continue to pay attention to this, just like if you're in the Caribbean, pay attention to Invest 91, but we don't really know what's going to happen yet. Now, with the NHC cone, we are looking at around the Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe. This is expected to go north of Hawaii, and then it looks like on a lot of the forecast models that a lot of our rain and wind is going to be to the north of Kiko at this point, but that would mean that the impacts will be a bit less in Hawaii. So not looking at a direct hit, but still something to watch. Here's the GFS model showing Hurricane Kiko is expected to move north of Hawaii, but potentially a few showers happening across the Hawaiian Islands around Monday night, especially on Tuesday. Then it starts pulling away by Wednesday. Now here's the latest global tropics hazards outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Week 2, looking at September 10th to September 16th, we're looking at a 20% chance of tropical cyclone formation in the main development region. And then we're also looking at a 20% chance in that area that I mentioned of the Gulf, the Florida region, and the southwestern Atlantic. There is some potential for tropical activity that they are watching. And then the Eastern Pacific has a 40% chance of producing something else, so still very active over there. Then potentially week 3, September 17th to 23rd, we're looking at a 40% chance in the main development region and moving towards the Caribbean. So that's going to be something to watch down the road. And also, same thing, the Gulf, Florida, and the southwestern Atlantic should also be watching for potential activity, especially, as I mentioned, especially if you see a frontal storm system across this region. If you see a cold front extending down into the tropics, you could have some potential subtropical or tropical storm activity there. And then also the Eastern Pacific, looking at a 20% chance of formation. So yeah, that's pretty much what's happening in the tropics. Invest 91, which was expected to become Tropical Storm Gabrielle within a couple of days, that has downtrended, but we'll have to still see what happens with that one over the next several days, and then see what happens down the road. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already, share the video, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more weather updates on the tropics. Thanks for watching. Extreme Weather Zone, out.